Of the many factors that influence our psychological health throughout our lives, the importance of companions is crucial. Ideas, emotions, and ways of life are contagious, and therefore, we tend to think and behave like the people we are close to. If we interact mainly with depressed, anxious, or neurotic individuals, or with people who always doubt and make excuses about why things cannot be done, then this fear of life will be contagious. Recognizing the strong influence of the people we are close to is a fundamental step. The simple way to improve our lives is to stop spending so much time with individuals who do not exhibit the character traits we want to cultivate. But although this is easy in theory, it can be difficult in practice, depending on the type of life we want to lead. If our goal is simply to work in a job, earn as much money as possible, and tirelessly pursue social status along the way, then it will be relatively easy to find people who share these values. However, if our goal is the development of a more complete personality and the cultivation of a meaningful life, then finding people with similar aspirations can be difficult. Here lies the problem. Time does not stop while we look for the ideal social groups in which to integrate. If we cannot surround ourselves with individuals who inspire us and help us to be better people, then we must at least learn to resist the negative influence they exert on us and to move forward on our chosen path regardless of the behavior of our family and friends. Although our social environment influences the course of our life, it is not decisive. History provides many examples of individuals who grew up in the worst environments, overcame such obstacles, and achieved something in their lives. Robert Greene, in his book The Laws of Human Nature, points to the great Russian author Anton Chekhov as an outstanding example of such an individual. Chekhov was born in a Russian village on the Sea of Azov, a town he described as full of idle, lazy, illiterate drunks. Life in Chekhov's home was no better, as his father was a man with an explosive temper who frequently beat his children. When Chekhov was 15, his two older brothers abandoned the family and moved to Moscow, which made Chekhov's life worse as he became the main focus of his father's brutality. Shortly after the departure of his brothers, the family store declared bankruptcy, and to avoid debtor's prison, Chekhov's father fled to Moscow, soon followed by his mother and two younger brothers. However, Chekhov was left behind and forced to fend for himself at the age of 16. Chekhov's youth was clearly one of hardship, and he had more reasons than most to fall into a life of self-pity or drown in alcohol, as his older brother did. But he was different. He didn't want to be like the other members of his family. He wanted to be someone else. He wanted to do something with his life. Instead of perpetuating the dysfunction of his family, he wanted to show that another way of life was possible. As Robert Greene writes, Chekhov made a vow to himself that he would never again bow down or apologize to people, no more complaints and blame, no more disordered life and waste of time. To support himself, he became a tutor while continuing to attend school. He graduated with such high grades that he was offered a scholarship to medical school in Moscow, giving him the opportunity to reunite with his family. Instead of showing anger and resentment over past mistreatment, Chekhov recognized that his parents were also victims of poor parenting. Chekhov's devotion to his work, whether his writing or medical practice, and his ability to cultivate the habits necessary to excel was what finally gave him the freedom to rise above his social situation. More time creating and producing, as Chekhov did, will greatly strengthen our sense of self and diminish the feelings of helplessness that keep people trapped in bad situations. Focusing on some form of intrinsically rewarding work and becoming good at it will open up new opportunities that can bring us closer to people who better share our values. The problem for many people, however, is that they do not accept that they can also cultivate the habits and skills necessary to excel at something. Instead, they create a story to explain why their situation is different and why their family and friends are really to blame for everything that is wrong in their life. Although other people can make our life much more difficult, it is our choices and actions, or lack thereof, that truly shape who we become. If we can simply drown out the noise of our social environment for a portion of the day and focus on cultivating the skills and habits necessary to move in the direction of who we wish to be, then slowly but surely, the control of our social environment will loosen. Along with a new devotion to our work, we must also adopt a new attitude towards the social world and see people in a way more analogous to the way we see inanimate objects in the physical world. In other words, we should see people as facts. This approach will strengthen our resolve and decrease the ability of bad influences to drag us back to our old way of being. As Robert Greene explains, interactions with other people are the main source of emotional turbulence, but it doesn't have to be that way. The problem is that we are continually judging people, wishing that they were something that they are not. We want them to think and act in a certain way, and as this is not possible, because everyone is different, we are continually frustrated and upset. Instead, we should see other people as phenomena, as neutral as comets or plants, that is, they simply exist. Seeing people as facts does not mean that we interact with them in a cold and impersonal way. It simply means that we stop trying to change them and do our best to accept them as completely as possible, with all their flaws. Not only will our friends and family appreciate our acceptance, but we will no longer waste our time trying to change our peers through sermons and arguments. As Carl Jung wisely pointed out, the best way to change someone close to us is not with words but with example. A child is certainly impressed by the big words of his parents, wrote Jung, but in reality, it is the lives of the parents that educate the child. What they add with words at best only serves to confuse him. Although a change in our attitude can help reduce the negative influence that others have on ourselves, we also need to recognize that although social life is important, not all social interactions contribute to our well-being. Some relationships are toxic, some interactions are empty, and some people are so set in their ways that ending certain relationships is simply the most effective way to move forward. Later in his life, Chekhov wrote to a friend with an idea for a story. This story would reflect his life experience, and the words he wrote in this letter can provide inspiration for all those who feel trapped in the downward pull of their social environment. He writes about how this young man squeezes the slave out of himself drop by drop, and how one beautiful morning he wakes up and discovers that the blood that runs through his veins is no longer the blood of a slave, but that of a true human being. Buddha believed that the greatest joy of man should be the growth of personality. But he also realized that the ability to achieve this task does not come naturally. We must learn for ourselves how to sculpt a great character, and this requires the willingness to experiment with some techniques that others have devised for this purpose. Self-hatred is a debilitating state to exist in, as with this hatred comes a plethora of distressing emotions such as guilt, shame, anxiety, and regret. To deal with these emotions, most people resort to what is called self-suppressive escapism. This escapism can take many forms, whether it is drug and alcohol abuse, eating disorders, addictions to social media, pornography, or video games, or a compulsive need to always be working or socializing. What all these behaviors share is that they induce a cognitive narrowing through which both self-awareness and critical evaluation of it are suppressed. As the authors of the article explain, engagement in activities such as escape from oneself, the desire to escape that drives self-suppressive behaviors is not wrong. We should want to escape a sense of self that is causing us suffering and limiting the possibilities of our life. The problem, however, is that self-suppressive escapism is like spraying perfume on a set of dirty clothes. It can divert our attention from our psychological pain in the short term, but over time, it only exacerbates our underlying problems. What those of us who feel the need to escape need are not behaviors that make us forget who we are, but a new self to escape from. Using a second self as a means to escape self-hatred is based on the idea that we can be active creators of ourselves and is achieved using the methods that gave rise to our initial sense of self, that is to say, emulation and imitation. We must understand that who we are now is shaped by many forces, but among the main ones are our role models. We have always sought guidance from our role models. We copied their strategies to face life's challenges, and their positive or negative comments helped shape who we are now. If self-hatred fills our days, it is likely that one of the reasons for this is that we lack decisive role models. This is a deficit that the creation of an alter ego can fill. In other words, this ego being is who we would be if our life had been spent emulating nurturing role models rather than having been shaped by the role models we were given. The construction of this alter ego begins with finding people we deem worthy of emulation. We may not know anyone personally who meets this criterion. But there are countless figures from the past who will meet our criteria, whatever it may be. After choosing our models, we want to study them deeply. In other words, know what made them great, what personality traits they cultivated, and how they faced adversity. However, in this construction of ideals, we must be careful to not make the mistake of completely ignoring who we are now. We need to be aware of our capabilities and our vulnerable flanks and integrate all this into our conception of our alter ego. Once we have formulated an idea of who we will be, we should get to the point of writing a character sketch of this second personality and ask ourselves the following questions. What are the traits that define that person? How is it different from the way we behave now, and how would it react to the challenges we currently face? This process of writing makes our alter ego feel more real and provides us with important information for the second stage of the process, which is to use this second personality as a healthy means of escape. An approach that we can use to achieve this feat was developed by psychologist George Kelly and is called fixed role therapy. Fixed role modeling is a psychotherapeutic technique in which a person is asked to write a character sketch of someone they would be interested in becoming, a person who differs in at least one significant aspect from who they are now. Once this alternative sense of self is created, which in our case is our second self, the next step is, as Michael Mahoney explains, the purpose of this experiment, as cited by George Kelly, is to act as if one were that person until eventually the differences between the assumed role and our real self begin to fade. As we attempt this experiment, we will go out of character at times, But the important thing is to return to acting as our second self as quickly as possible. To help us in these crucial moments, we may find it useful to devise a ritual that symbolizes and facilitates our transformation into our second self. Todd Herman, author of The Alter Ego Effect, warns that this technique will only work if the ritualized actions we select are performed exclusively when we need to activate the transition to our second self. As Herman explains to athletes and coaches, the incorporated actions that a ritual implies can be surprisingly effective in fostering the change in our mindset needed to become our second self. A great figure from the past who understood the transformative power of a ritual was Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli, a prominent thinker of the Italian Renaissance, deeply understood how a ritual can have a transformative impact on a person's mind and behavior. Before writing his famous philosophical and political treatises, Machiavelli developed a personal ritual. This ritual was designed to help him make the mental and emotional transition into the role of philosopher and writer. By committing to this ritual, he prepared his mind and body to adopt the mental state required to think deeply and strategically, characteristics that he later captured in his most influential works. Over time, if we continue to be diligent in the practice of behaving as our second self, using a ritual to return us to the way each time we hesitate, we will discover that almost imperceptibly, our second self will become second nature. But like all experiments, our success in the end will depend on the degree of courage we can muster. We need the courage to act in the face of the anxiety that this experiment will generate, the courage to move forward despite how strange it may feel to act as a different person, and the courage to risk the mistakes that will inevitably occur when we call our second selves into action. When doubts creep in and threaten to lead us astray, and when the attractions of our old self-sustaining behaviors are strong, it may be helpful to remind ourselves why we are trying this experiment. We should contrast what our life will be like if we continue as we are now versus what our life might be like if we somehow managed a healthy escape and became more of our second selves. As we learn from Carl Jung, the only meaning of human existence consists of turning on a light in the darkness of mere being. Remember to subscribe and hit the like button for more videos and to help us reach more people.